Good afternoon. Welcome to another week of In the Word, and again, my name is Tom Simmons. I'm a Bible scholar student for the last 30 plus years. My passion is studying the Word and looking at things especially in original context. And in doing that today, we're going to look at a story that is so very familiar, but we're going to look at it from the original audience perspective and see what else we can glean from it. And the story we're going to look at is called the parable of the lost son, the prodigal son, the two sons, the loving father. And that parable is found in Luke chapter 15. And it's in a group of different parables that Jesus is talking about. And remember, the whole concept of parables, teaching in parables, was not new to Jesus. This was a way rabbis had been teaching for a while. And it's a great way to teach a multitude of people of different learning or different levels all at the same time. So they could be at different economic levels or learning levels, and you could still teach them. So we're going to look at this parable. Now, a lot of times we call this parable the parable of the prodigal son. Now here's the thing. The word prodigal means wasteful, indulgent, reckless. So remember that, okay? So Jesus says there was a man who had two sons, and the younger said to the father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property among them. So the story involves three family members. And to understand this story, we really need to look at all three of the family members involved. The parables deals with two types of people. It's not a strong statement against the Pharisees and their teachings. You see, Jesus did attack hypocritical practices of some, but he never attacked the teachings or the movement. The profound message of this story is tied to the Jewish understanding of God and his people. So let's go on. So what happened? Well, first we know the younger son comes to the father and says, "Give me my share of the estate." Now you need to understand, to the original Jewish audience, when they heard this, there was probably a gasp and silence, because this is such a profane statement that he is making. He literally is saying, "I wish you were dead." Because typically, not always, but typically one did not inherit until the person died. So he literally is saying to his father, "I wish you were dead." Now, to the Jewish audience, there's something missing here. Remember, there are two sons, an elder and a younger. They are waiting for the elder brother to rebuke the younger brother, put him in his place, and demand an apology to the father. But his silence speaks volume. Okay? So, the father does it. It says, in verse 12, he divided his property among them. Now, here's something we need to really understand. He divided his property between the two, right? The younger brother gets 1/3. The elder brother got 2/3. The elder brother received the double portion, and his silence is also showing acceptance. He's accepting what the younger brother is speaking. He wishes it or believes it, but he doesn't say it. So he quietly receives his part of the inheritance without involving himself in the conflict. You see, as the elder brother, it was his responsibility to go to the younger brother and work and mediate this crisis. He should have demanded an apology to the father. But you see, he views his father for what he can get. He views his father for commercialism, his finances. His relationship with his father is based upon this. Now, the older brother, a lot of times, most of the time when we look at this parable, is thought of being in the right until his brother returns. But the reality was, he never was. He shares in the guilt of what happens from the beginning in his silence. And the reality is, he benefited more by allowing his younger brother to request the division. He does not disobey his father, but he fails to fulfill his role as a mediator. The original audience would have seen through him. He has a broken relationship with his father. Now, continuing, verse 13. Not long after that, the younger brother gets everything together, sets off to a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Okay, so not long after that, the estate is liquidated. So I want you to think about a couple of things. While the estate is being liquidated, or once it is, someone else is working 1/3 of that land, reaping the profit from it, while the father is still alive and seeing it. Okay, so verse 13, we know the younger brother is a rebel to the core. He commits a terrible offense and then he goes off. He defies his father's love, seeing him, like the elder brother, only for his assets. He liquidates everything and he travels. It says, to a distant land. That means a Gentile nation. And now the second statement that gets the Jewish audience up in an uproar, it says, he squandered his wealth in wild living. Now he has become the prodigal. And you need to understand, in Jewish culture, wasting of wealth was as great a sin as there was, because wealth was considered godliness. So if he was wasting his wealth, he is sinful. So what happens? After he has spent everything, there's a severe famine in the whole country, and he becomes in need. So what happens? Well, he's living there as a playboy, wild living, spends everything he has, and famine sets in. He has no skills, and he's a foreigner. A food shortage always hurts the poor and the homeless first. He's both. So then it says, after that, verse 15, he became in need, and so he goes to, and he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to the field to feed pigs. All right, so now he's homeless, he's hungry, and out of his hunger he joins himself with a citizen of that country, a non-Jew. This citizen still has food and livestock, but by making himself valuable to the wealthy person of the land, he hopes to get food, to get by. See, Jesus is painting this very desperate situation. And of course, the citizen, the non-Jew, obviously wants to get rid of the boy. Why? He sends him to feed pigs. He would have known that pigs were so offensive to a Jew. And Jesus also knows, by putting this in, his audience is totally repulsed by this. They realize the boy has lost his way entirely. Then the text says that no one would feed the boy. Think about this. It's more important to care for the pigs than it was a human being. And it says that he longed to eat from the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And the pods were from the carob tree, very common in that area. Now we come to what we think is the climax of the story, maybe, but it really isn't. Because it says, in verse 16, he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Now verse 17. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? Now, a lot of times when we're talking about this story, we say, oh, he is repenting. But the word metanoia is not here. It says he came back to his own self. And in the Hebrew, the understanding is that he returned to his original thinking. So his audience is understanding he's coming back to understanding he's a Jew and what that means. Okay? Now he says, How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving? I will set out and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So here's the reality. Even in his thinking, he fails to still see his father's heart. He's still seeing him as a resource. He has changed his view of himself, but not his father. Now, in saying, I will treat me like one of your hired men, understand these are paid men. So what he is thinking in his head is, I will go back, tell my father I'm not worthy to be your son. His thinking's changed there. Now, teach me a trade like your hired men so that I can live and exist the rest of my life. He still doesn't see his father for who he is. He still sees him as a resource. He doesn't take him for granted now, maybe, but he still doesn't see him. So here's what happens. So verse 18, he set out and go back to my father. So he sets out. Verse 20, he got up and goes to his father. But it says, while he was a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion, ran to the son, threw his arms around him, saving him and kissing him. Okay. So the father does a couple of things. Number one, in verse 20, he sees him. That means he's looking for him. He's out looking for him. And when he sees him, he's number one, he's filled with compassion. He runs to him, which we all know elderly Jewish men did not run. They sat at the gates, watching what was coming in and going out from the city, making decisions on commerce, things like that. He hugs him and kisses him. So in doing those things, he's making statements. When he runs and hugs him, remember, he's been feeding pigs. He's been starving. He smells. He's unclean. His father doesn't care that he hasn't been purified, that he's unclean. He runs and grabs him and embraces him. He's saying, you're mine, regardless of the fact that you're still unclean. You haven't gone through the purification. I shouldn't be able to touch you, but I will. And then he kisses him. And in kissing him, he's restoring him back into the family. Now, verse 21. The son says to him, remember his rehearsed speech? Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Boom! The father stops him. The son is rejecting his birthright out of sorrow and guilt. But the father cuts him off and he puts the ring on his finger. That ring, that signet ring, restores him as an heir to the estate, as an heir to his father. He puts a robe, he takes his robe, his best robe, and puts it on him, on his smelly, stinky, unclean body. Think about that. And then he puts sandals on him. And in putting sandals on him, he's saying, you will not be one of my hired men. You will be my son. So, then the father says, quick, verse 22, bring the best robe, put it on him, ring on his finger, sandals on his feet, bring the fatted calf, let's kill it, let's have a feast and celebrate. He simply wants to celebrate. Because he says in verse 24, for the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, so they begin to celebrate. He was dead. He's referring to his spiritual condition. When he went to a non-Jewish land, he was dead. He was lost. Now he's come home again. He's found. Okay? Now the story continues. Meanwhile, now we go back to the elder brother. See, Jesus' audience has been wondering, what's going on with the elder brother? He hasn't been mentioned since the first part of the story. They want to know what's going on with him. because in their mind, the majority of the responsibility lies on him. The elder brother comes in from the field. He hears the music when he gets near the house. He calls a servant and asks what's going on. He says, "Your brother has come," he's replied. "Your father has killed the fatted calf because he is back safe and sound." Now, you would think the brother would be happy, but it says in verse 28, the elder brother refused, became angry, refused to come in. His father goes out to plead with him, but he answers his father. Look, he doesn't even address him correctly. He addresses him in a very short manner with no respect. "Look, I've been slaving for you all these years and never disobeyed your orders," which is a lie. He got 3/4 of the estate. He's been working for himself the whole time. Whether he realized that or not is not important. The fact is, he's been working for himself. See, the older brother is still full of unforgiveness and mistrust of both his brother and his father. He refuses to address his father correctly. And even when he does that, the loving father comes back to him and says, "My son," verse 31, "you are always with me. Everything I have is yours." We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours is alive again. He was lost and now is found. So the loving father wants him to see a couple of things. Number one, he does not try to convince either son that they're wrong. He's ready to receive both of them when they repent. And it's just as important to the father that the older brother forgive the younger as it is he sees his heart. He has to see. One cannot be a son simply for personal gain or to escape punishment. They have to see their father for what he is, love. So what's the story here? It ends, and the Jewish audience doesn't understand what happened to the elder brother. Does he repent? Does he see his father for who he truly is? Or does he continue on his way? So you have two sons. You have the religious and the non-religious. You have the Gentile and you have the Jew. And both, Jesus is pointing out, are not seeing the Father for who he is, a Father who simply wants to be loved. See, we can come to God for all the wrong reasons, but at some point we have to put those aside and understand it's simply love. It's not what he can give us. It's not what he can do. It's not get out of hell insurance. It's simply because he loved us and we love him. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of different look at this parable. God bless you and have a good day.